Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of tradition we call Torah, which we not only inherit, but which we also add to through our respectful embrace of it and our sharing our own insights and interpretations of it. So we are in Parshat Vayakhel, which is in the book of Exodus, chapter 35, beginning with verse 1. And we'll read through the English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a focus study about it, and then we'll have our collective collaborative conversation about it. If you want to go ahead and unmute, at this time together we can recite a blessing which gives thanks for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
asher
asher
kidshanu
kidshanu
mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Thank you,
Amen.
God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Exodus chapter 35, verse 1. Moses then assembled the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that Adonai has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, and on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to Adonai. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." Moses said further to the whole community of Israelites, "This is what Adonai has instructed. Take from among you gifts to God. Everyone whose heart so moves them shall bring them. Gifts for Adonai, gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and copper, silver, gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, and goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting for the ephod and the breastpiece. Richard, would you like to continue there? 10?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. And let all among you who are skilled come and make all that the Lord has commanded. The tabernacle, its tent and its covering, its clasps and its planks, its bars, its posts and its sockets, the ark and its poles, the cover and the curtain for the screen, the table and its poles and all the utensils and the bread of display, the lampstand for lighting, its furnishings and its lamps, and the oil for lighting, the altar of incense and its poles, the anointing oil and the aromatic incense, and the entrance screen for the entrance to the tabernacle, the altar of burnt offering, its copper grating, its poles, and all the furnishings, the laver and its stand, the hangings of the enclosure, its posts and its sockets, and the screen for the gate of the court, the pegs for the tabernacle, the pegs for the enclosure and their cords, the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary, the sacred vestments of Aaron, the priest, and the vestments of his sons for priestly service.
Thank you. Anna, would you like to read a little bit? We're at verse 20.
Thank you. So the whole community of the Israelites left Moses' presence, and everyone who excelled in ability and everyone whose spirit was moved came, bringing to God an offering for the work of the tent of meeting and for all its service and for the sacred vestments. Men and women, all whose hearts moved them, all who would make an elevation offering of gold to God, came bringing brooches, earrings, rings and pendants, gold objects of all kinds, and everyone who possessed blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, and goat's hair, tanned ram skins, and dolphin skins brought them. Everyone who would make gifts of silver or copper brought them as gifts to God. And everyone who possessed acacia wood for any work of the service brought that. And all the skilled women spun with their own hands and brought what they had spun in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen. All the women who excelled in that skill spun goat's hair. And the chieftains brought lapis lazuli and other stones for setting, for the ephod and breastpiece, and spices and oil for lighting, for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense. Thus, the Israelites, all the men and women whose hearts moved them to bring anything for the work that God through Moses had commanded to be done, brought it as a freewill offering to God.
Thank you so much. Jim, would you like to read starting at verse 30?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Moses said to the Israelites, see, God has singled out by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. He has endowed him with the divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft, and has inspired him to make designs for work in gold, silver, and copper, to cut stones for setting, and to carve wood, to work in every kind of designer's craft, and to give directions. He and Oliabab, son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, have been endowed with the skill to do any work of the carver, the designer, the embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen, and of the weaver as workers in all craft and as makers of designs. Let then Bezalel and Oholiabab and all the skilled persons whom God has endowed with skill and ability to perform expertly all the tasks connected with the service of the sanctuary carry out all that God has commanded.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. Justin and Linda, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 2 of chapter 36?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Verse 2.
Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. And Moses called Bezalel and Oholiab and every wise-hearted man into whose heart the Lord had given wisdom, everyone whose heart lifted him up to approach the work to do it. So they took from before Moses all the offerings that the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of the holy, and they brought him more gifts every morning. Then all the wise men who were doing the work of the holy came, each one from his work, which they'd been doing. And they spoke to Moses, saying, the people are bringing very much, more than is enough for the labor of the articles, which the Lord had commanded to do. So Moses commanded, and they announced in the camp, saying, let no man or woman do any more work for the offering for the holy. So the people stopped bringing, and the work was sufficient for them, for all the work, to do it and to leave over.
Then all the wise-hearted people of the performers of the work made the Mishkan out of 10 curtains, consisting of fine, twisted linen and blue, purple, and crimson wool, a cherubim design, the work of a master weaver. He made them. The length of one curtain was 28 cubits, and the width of one curtain was 4 cubits, the same measure for all the curtains. And he joined 5 of these curtains to one another, and the other 5 curtains he also joined to one another. And he made loops of blue wool on the edge of one curtain, that is, at the edge of the first set, and he did the same at the edge of the outermost curtain of the second set. He made 50 loops on the edge of one curtain, and he made 50 loops on the edge of the curtain in the second set. The loops corresponded to one another. And he made 50 golden clasps, and he fastened the curtains to one another with clasps, so the Mishkan became one.
Thank you so much, both of you. Beautiful. And Jay, would you read a little bit starting there at verse 14?
Okay. They made cloths of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. They made the cloths 11 in number. The length of each cloth was 30 cubits, and the width of each cloth was 4 cubits. 11 cloths having the same measurements. They joined 5 of the cloths by themselves and the other 6 cloths by themselves. They made 50 loops on the edge of the outermost cloth of one set, and they made 50 loops on the edge of the cloth of the other set. They made 50 copper clasps to couple the tent together so that it might become one whole. And they made a covering of tanned ram skins for a tent, and a covering of dolphin skins above. They made the planks for the tabernacle of acacia wood upright. The length of each plank was 10 cubits, the width of each plank a cubit and a half. Each plank had two tenons parallel to each other. They did the same with all the planks of the tabernacle. Of the planks of the tabernacle, they made 20 planks for the south side, making 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 tenons, and 2 sockets under each following plank for its 2 tenons. And for the other side wall of the tabernacle, the north side, 20 planks, and with their 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 sockets under each following plank. And for the rear of the tabernacle to the west, they made 6 planks. And they made 2 planks for the corners of the tabernacle at the rear. They matched at the bottom, but terminated as one at the top into one ring. They did so with both of them at the 2 corners. Thus, there were 8 planks with sockets of silver, 16 sockets, 2 under each plank.
Thank you, Dave. And Jay Isaac, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 31?
Thank you, Rabbi. 31. They made bars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks of the one side wall of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the planks of the other side wall of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the planks of the wall of the tabernacle at the rear to the west. They made the center bar to run halfway up the planks from end to end. They overlaid the planks with gold and made their rings of gold as holders for the bars, and they overlaid the bars with gold. They made the curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarn and fine twisted linen, working it into a design of cherubim. They made for it 4 posts of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold, with their hooks of gold, and they cast for them 4 silver sockets. They made the screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen, done in embroidery and 5-point posts for it with their hooks. They overlaid their tops and their bands with gold, but the 5 sockets were of copper.
Thank you, Jay. Mark Thompson, would you like to start us off with chapter 37?
I would, thank you. We're in chapter 37, verse 1. Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. He overlaid it with pure gold inside and out. He made a gold rim for it all around. Cast 4 gold rings for the ark on its 4 corners, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on its other side. He made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. He then inserted the poles through the rings on the sides of the ark so that the ark could be carried with them. He made for the ark a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. He made 2 golden cherubim. He hammered them out of the 2 ends of the cover. He made 1 cherub from one end and 1 cherub from the other end. He thus made the cherubim from the cover itself, from its 2 ends. The cherubim had their wings spread aloft, so their wings shielded the cover. They faced one another, the faces of the cherubim being inclined downward toward the cover. He made the table of acacia wood. 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. He overlaid it with pure gold and made a gold rim for it all around. He made a frame for it all around, 1 handbreadth wide, and made a gold rim for its frame all around. He cast 4 gold rings for the table and placed the rings on the 4 corners of its 4 legs. The rings were close to the frame as holders for the poles used for carrying the table. He made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold for carrying the table. He made the utensils to go on the table, its bread forms, its spoons for the frankincense, its supporting frames for its shelving tubes, and its shelving tubes with which the bread would be covered out of pure gold.
Thank you so much. Let me invite David and Susan if you'd like to continue there, verse 17.
Thank you, Rabbi.
He made the lampstand of pure gold. He made the lampstand, its base and its shaft of hammered work. Its cups, calyxes, and petals were of one piece with it. 6 branches issued from its sides, 3 branches from one side of the lampstand and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand. There were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals on one branch. And there were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals on the next branch. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand.
And 4 almond-shaped cups within the menorah, with its ornaments and flowers, and an an ornament under the 2 branches from it, and an ornament under the 2 branches from it, and an ornament under the 2 branches from it, for the 6 branches that came out of it. Their ornaments and their branches were part of it, all of one hammered work of pure gold. And he made its lamps, 7, and its tongs and its fire holders of pure gold. He made it and all of its equipment out of a talent of pure gold. And he made the incense altar of acacia wood, its length a cubit and its width a cubit square, and its height 2 cubits. Its horns were a part of it. And he plated it with pure gold, its roof and its walls all around, and its horns. And he made a border of gold for it all around. And he made 2 rings of gold for it below its rim, on its 2 sides, on its 2 side walls, for housing for poles with which to carry it. And he made the poles of acacia wood and plated them with gold. And he made the holy anointing oil and the pure incense fragrances, the work of an ointment maker.
Oh, thank you. And let me invite Robert. Would you like to read a part of chapter 38?
Yes, thank you. And he made the altar of burnt offering of shittim wood. 5 cubits was the length thereof, and 5 cubits the breadth thereof. It was 4 square, and 3 cubits the height thereof. And he made the horns thereof on the 4 corners of it. The horns thereof were of the same, and he overlaid it with brass. And he made all the vessels of the altar, the pots and the shovels and the basins and the flesh hooks and the fire pans. All the vessels thereof made he of brass. And he made for the altar a brazen gate of network under the compass thereof, beneath unto the midst of it. And he cast 4 rings for the 4 ends of the grate of brass, to be places for the staves. And he made the staves of shittim wood and overlaid them with brass. And he put the staves into the rings on the sides of the altar to bear it withal. He made the altar hollow with boards. And he made the laver of brass, and the foot of it of brass, and the looking glasses of the women assembling, which assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he made the court on the south side southward. The hangings of the court were of fine twined linen and 100 cubits. Their pillars were 20, and their brazen sockets 20. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. And for the north side, the hangings were 100 cubits. Their pillars were 20, and their sockets of brass 20. The hooks of the pillars and the fillets of silver. And for the west side were hanging of 50 cubits, their pillars 10, and their sockets 10, the hooks of the pillars and the fillets of silver. And for the east side, eastward, 50 cubits. The hangings of the one side of the gate were 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And for the other side of the court gate, on this hand and that hand, were hangings of 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3.
Thank you, Robert. And Deborah, would you like to read from verse 16 on?
Yes, thank you. All the hangings around the enclosure were of fine twisted linen. The sockets for the posts were of copper. The hooks and bands of the posts were of silver. The overlay of their tops was of silver. All the posts of the enclosure were banded with silver. The screen of the gate of the enclosure, done in embroidery, was of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. It was 20 cubits long. Its height or width was 5 cubits, like that of the hangings of the enclosure. The posts were 4, their 4 sockets were of copper, their hooks of silver, and the overlay of their tops was of silver, as were also their bands. All the pegs of the tabernacle and of the enclosure round about were of copper.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for this week. I'd like to share with you a focus study about it. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this moment. And of course, the focus of this week's portion has to do with the construction of this facility called the Mishkan. And years ago, when Anna and I went on a tour of Timna Park in southern Israel, it was pointed out to us as we were passing by it that there out in the wilderness was a structure that had been built by a Lutheran church in Germany, from Germany, that was built according to the exact specifications as they read them, with all the same materials that we just read of the Mishkan. And it was, on the one hand, it was a stunning engineering feat to see something that we had read in Torah. There it was, built by human hands out there in Timna Park. On the other hand, I looked at it and I thought, is that really what was being instructed here in what we've just read to be built? Is that really what this construction process was all about? So that's what I would like to focus on, which is what exactly is being built here. So for that, I've focused on our study sheet on some of the materials and some of the intention and some of the skills that were required to build this place, which is to be purposed for bringing contact between the Israelites and God. So first, number one, I have the verse from chapter 35. Let all among you who are skilled come and make the Mishkan. So first I want to focus on the word that gets translated, at least in my addition into English as skilled. The Hebrew there is Chacham Lev, which really means wise of heart. So it seems that one of the primary skills or attributes that's necessary in order to build this construct that's to cause the divine to dwell with us has to be with not so much technical skill, but a kind of spiritual and emotional attribute, wisdom of the heart. And then I want to focus on what is being built here in Hebrew is called a mishkan. And that the word mishkan is from the Hebrew verb, which means to dwell. So it is a site of dwelling. And the same Hebrew verb also gives rise to the word Shekhinah, which in Jewish tradition means the dwelling within or indwelling presence of the divine. So we're going to focus both on this notion of wisdom of the heart and also this word Mishkan as we go through our study sheet together. And then later on in that same chapter, chapter 35, we have this: everyone whose heart lifted him and everyone of generous spirit came bringing his offering for the work of the tent of meeting. And here it says Ochel, which means tent, Moed, which means appointed time or appointed place, place of appointment. So every year when I read through this portion, I find myself stumbling over this notion that there are two different words that seem to be used for this single construction project. One is Mishkan and one is Ochel Moed. And I've always allowed myself to avoid kind of exploring, are these two separate structures? Are they two different names for the same structure? Is one structure inside of the other? And as soon as those questions come into my mind, I kind of keep reading on and never really explore them. So that's part of what I want to explore with you this evening. Now, going back to the notion of Chacham Lev, wisdom of the heart, I found this in Proverbs. One whose heart is wise, the Hebrew there is Chacham Lev also, receives instructions. So there's something about that attribute of having a wise heart that not only receives what is being asked of oneself and guidance and instructions that are being offered, as well as the capacity to then receive that and then design and construct something that causes the divine to dwell within us. And here I found also in Proverbs this wisdom, Chochmot, has built her house, Beta. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has prepared her feast, mixed the wine, and also set her table, Shulchana. So I couldn't resist putting this on our study sheet. One, because once again, it's now taking that notion of wisdom, and here is now, in a sense, personifying it. It's now a character who is the subject of action here, Chochmot, and is building a house, and then goes on to say she's hewn her 7 pillars, prepared her feast, mixed the wine, and set her table. And since the name of our organization is Shulchan, I couldn't resist including this verse as well, set her table. So here we have these two words, Mishkan and Ochel Moed, which are being seemingly used interchangeably to describe the structure that is being built. And Mishkan, which comes from the notion, the verb to dwell, and it's a dwelling that is designed to cause the divine presence to abide among the Israelites. And the fact that the same verb also gives us another name for the divine spirit, that of Shekhinah. To me, what I get from that is that the Mishkan is identified with a dwelling for the infinite, the eternal, that which has no end, that which has no definition, that which has no end. And then the Ohel Moed, for me anyway, conveyed a very different feeling and sense because the word moed comes from the Hebrew verb ya'ad, which means a point, to appoint a specific time or a specific place. So, for example, we often refer to moed during our various hagim. A moed is in a specific time. So for me, the Ocha Moed, the tent of meeting, is indicating, in contrast to the Mishkan, which is designated for the infinite, this is now a dwelling for that which is time specific or place specific or something that is finite both in space and time and embodiment, if you will. So the project here, as I am experiencing it for the first time really this year as I read through this portion, is that the project, in a sense, is a joining of different dimensions, the finite and the infinite, that which is without boundary and that which is confined by boundary. And somehow these two dimensions are now interpenetrating, and that is what causes the divine to dwell not only among us, but also inside of us, which is how the Hebrew can be rendered. So this notion about space and the different kinds of space, which this Torah portion evokes for me, also made me think of a French philosopher of science, Gaston Bachelard, who really focused a lot of his work on the notions of space and really what constitutes space and different kinds of space. And he drew a distinction between what he called a structure, a physical structure that people could live in, and then an actual home. And the home was where people had an opportunity to engage in relationships with others, an opportunity to explore their own memories, an opportunity to engage in rituals and traditions, that it was a place of dynamic culture, if you will, and evolution. It was a dynamic place, not something that was merely of sticks or bricks that could be stable and well defined. So let me share with you a little bit of readings from Gaston Bachelard, and then we'll look at a painting that was inspired by his work. So here on our study sheet on the backside, we're going to look at numbers 4, 6, and 7. And this is from his book, The Poetics of Space. If I were asked to name the chief benefit of the house, I should say, the house shelters daydreaming, the house protects the dreamer, the house allows one to dream in peace. And number 6 from his book, Air and Dreams. We always think of the imagination as the faculty that forms images. On the contrary, it deforms what we perceive. It is, above all, the faculty that frees us from immediate images and changes them. If there is no change or unexpected fusion of images, there is no imagination. There is no imaginative act. If the image that is present does not make us think of one that is absent, if an image does not determine an abundance, an explosion of unusual images, then there is no imagination. A stable and completely realized image clips the wings of the imagination. Thanks to the imaginary, imagination is essentially open and elusive. It is the human psyche's experience of openness and novelty. More than any other power, it is what distinguishes the human psyche. Bachelard's explosive notion about the role of imagination and how it is not really that which forms images, but takes what we see and recognizes that there's more than what we see before us. And imagination takes what our eyes perceive and then begins to create new possibilities out of that. So part of what Bachelard is dealing with here, uh, he was writing in the 30s and 40s and 50s, is the inheritance of, in part, what is happening in the world of physics. And what physics is, contemporary physics is now telling us about the nature of time and space. So before we get to modern day physics, we had dominating physics for hundreds of years, what we call Newtonian and Cartesian physics, which presented a determinative universe where there are absolute distinctions between what's past, what's present, and what's future, and makes an absolute distinction between what's here and what's over there. And so this, in a sense, was a very absolutist notion uh, of of what the world was made up of, and that physical space itself was empirical, it was locational, it was stable. And then comes, by the end of the 19th century, some observations by physicists which begin to disrupt this notion of stability and certainty that Newtonian physics was all about. And they begin to observe some anomalies that begin to unsettle the dominance of Newtonian physics. And that is the beginning of quantum physics. And Albert Einstein played a key role in developing these notions, which he and other colleagues developed, in which time itself becomes not clear, certain, and stable in terms of its delineation and separation, but becomes subjective and relative to our own frame of reference. And that space is also, physical space is not stable, that it has the capacity to become entangled and with far, far, far distant forces of energy and quickly move about and become influenced by other forces that are light years apart. And these are what's called entanglements. And also that where objects are, become influenced merely by our observation of them. So out of all this, we get this in the new physics, we get this string theory, and we get the notion that there are not just a single universe, there are multiple universes, which are all happening simultaneously, and the possibility that these multiple universes can even interact and affect one another. So this creates a very unstable and more dynamic world than the world that Newton had presented to us. So this is in part what Bachelard is inheriting and what he's now expressing, this notion that objects are not stable, that time itself has the capacity to weave in and out, that the past can be present in the future and be as impactful, if you will. And sometimes we live floating between different time dimensions, if you will. So an artist who was very influenced by the work of Bachelard is a Finnish artist, Emilia Nurmivara, and she has done a lot of paintings focusing on the home as a place of not just stability, but a place of dynamics. A home being a place where one encounters not just the moment, but one encounters past and also can begin to imagine the future. So things become much more fluid. So let me share with you what she wrote about her work, and then we'll look at her painting that's on the front of our study sheet. And she has written, "Through my paintings, I examine the value of physical objects in a home and the significance they have for our soul space and dreamscape. The childhood home gives us the first experience of a home and is the place where we first dream and bring our imagination to life. To breathe life to the portrayed interiors, I use elements of reflections from glass surfaces that turn the paintings into a visual play. I want to create an illusion of a room and try solving the problem between figurative and abstract imagery in a physical space. The image is built as a collaboration between reality and fantasy. I find it visually interesting how the different reflections distort the reality and give the paintings a dreamlike imagery. The space becomes new. And for both Nurmivara and Bachelard, it is not merely the space that becomes new. As Bachelard talks about it, he says, what's significant is inhabited space. An inhabited space, he says, transcends geometric space. And what he means by an inhabited space is that we live that space. We interact with other people in that space. We explore our memories in that space. We engage in rituals and traditions in that space. And when we do that, we become different than we were in a previous moment. So I want to conclude by taking it back to what's happening as I experienced it in this week's Torah portion. That the Israelites are not merely being engaged in a construction project of building a physical structure. They're engaged in a project that, in a sense, is going to cause different dimensions to interpenetrate and interact with one another. And it's not merely that an external entity that we call God is now going to come and be in this dimension. It is that the builders themselves, as a result of building that kind of dynamic space, become transformed. And this, I think, is part of what Torah is trying to share with us in this moment of journey, that things are not as stable as they might seem, that time itself is not as stable as it might seem. And that indeed, as the rabbinic tradition teaches us, that really in Torah, there's no beginning and ending. There's no past, present, and future. There is all a simultaneity of time that is happening. It is merely a part of our interaction with it that begins to slice it up into past, present, and future. But everything is happening right now, and what we make of it, what we take of it, has to do with what we need of it in any given moment. So this is what Bachelard refers to as poetic space, the capacity to disassemble what we've taken for granted and to begin imagining other possibilities, including other possibilities for ourselves. So with that, I'd love to know what you felt, what you experienced and encountered during this week's portion. If you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Thank you. Anna.
The doubling of the Mishkan and the Ohel Moed, it all the way through here with all the references that you made, I kept thinking of Israel and his first name. And there's another very important substantive part of the Torah that has two names of presence, the entanglement of being born, grabbing onto your brother's heel, coming out of the birth canal, in the entanglement, and then the dreaming, seeing things. Yeah, just struck me that you would probably want to think about that too.
I think thank you. And also you got me thinking that we're introduced to this character, Jacob, who is so complex and so dynamic, who can either be heroic or he can be miserly and disreputable. So, and I didn't really take us into the painting, so let me take us into the painting for a moment. this painting on the front by Emilia Numervara, which is called Room to Dream, which is a phrase taken from Bachelard's work. And the painting itself, what she's done as I experience her painting, there are layers of reality and layers of time in that, because there are objects there that are not linear in terms of their placement. There are objects there that seem to be layered upon other objects, and the whole room itself seems to be pulsating with experiences from other moments in her time in her growing up there. Uh, and so it is a place of both perhaps nostalgia and reminiscence, and maybe some of these images are also indicative of her dreaming about the future as well as what's happening in the present. So it's a room where all these different dimensions of time are pulsating and living with one another. And so that's what I saw in her painting. Thank you. Richard?
Couple things. Room to dream. We all need to have room to dream in our lives. It's not a place. It's using the mindset to engage the quantum as it runs through your brain every day. And each day as you get older, there's not just more memory, there's more understanding of what you are, not what you were, as it becomes part of self. And we need room to dream, not to just take the ego down the road. And then I thought, too, it's all happening at the zoo. Everything is going on all the time. All of time is always here if we need it. And that led me to the thought about, when you started out, I think you talked about what you saw in Israel, and you called it this construct. You didn't say construction. That there had been some kind of construct there. And then later on, when you talked about, well, they were given this task to do this, to try and unite two ways of looking at things in one. So you walk away with some more wisdom and spirituality within you, but you're still in the present doing stuff, whatever. And all these things they had 2 sessions ago, those are listed again. And the question is impertinent about, well, where did they come from? From their neighbors before they left Egypt? No, that's the fiction of telling the story of their trying to put their life together and what do they need. And one other thing, a line from a book that I read to my son when he was little was, if you have a house in your head, you'll be at home wherever you go.
Whoa.
And finally, you mentioned you mentioned Einstein, and that always makes me think of John Lennon and imagination. And I encourage everybody to listen to that song again, because it starts out, imagine there's no heaven. That it's not a place, it's something that's here, and it's something, the love we have, because that's what wisdom is, and that's what the skill is. It comes out of the love that the Lord has blessed people with. And this is, if you read Einstein's view, it's the same logic, the same formula that John Lennon is putting in this. And this is really what you're saying about there's this construct, and we're living this by doing this, whether or not it's there physically or whether it's going to serve these purposes in the physical world. This is about our dream. And the dream is of being in this house, doing this thing around this table. And that's the heaven we're all seeking.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Let me invite Robert and then David and Susan. Please go ahead, Robert.
Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. I was in a long video call with my daughter and a couple grandchildren. So I came in late for a very good reason. You mentioned, I have a question. You mentioned the beginning, three things. One of them was materials, one of them was skills. What was the third that you were thinking of?
I mentioned skill and intention and
Intention.
materials. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Because I thought that was an interesting construct to start out with. You know, I really appreciate the way you set this up immediately, looking at the inner and the outer. And tent of meetings, now I don't have your background, those of you who are Jewish, I don't have your background understanding what that looks like and what happens there. But my understanding of it is it does not have the detail and the focus on the detail that the Mishkan has. Am I correct?
I don't know.
Isn't this
Here's
the,
why.
I think it's just two different. I read it, at least this year. I read it as two different terms describing the same
Thing.
enterprise.
Okay, so again, you know, I'm out of my court here trying to understand, but when I thought of the tent of meeting, the language reminds me of our outer lives.
Hmm.
And we tend to spend so much emphasis on our outer lives. But the focus has been on the Mishkan. Someone with unique skills. I mean, he sounded like Michelangelo to me, a Jewish Michelangelo, in the sense that he had tremendous artistic abilities and artisan skills. And so all the detail that I have seen is in the Mishkan. So it made me think, and again, my thinking may be erroneous because I don't understand everything Jewish, right? But we do the opposite. We put so much emphasis on our outer lives instead of the detail, the beauty, the fine linen, the hammered gold and silver, and our inner lives. Understandably, we have to spend more time in our outer lives, but it's our inner lives where we have to really be that artisan, that artist, that devoted person who labors. And you look at the labor of this person, my goodness, it was not only seriously intentional, but it was ongoing. It was a continuum. You know, it's kind of like Michelangelo with the ceilings. So that's what came to my mind, that looking at how this was constructed and the detail, it is as though each one of those is a principle or a law of nature or a law of God telling us. And a proof of anything is, does it lead to unity or does it lead to division? So those were some of the thoughts that came to my mind.
That's great, Robert. And what you got me to think about is that there are constantly efforts within the Jewish tradition to counteract the emphasis on the outer. So just quickly, a couple of them that come to mind is one, the prophets come along and they begin to critique the emphasis on the external rituals of offerings and sacrifices that are being provided, as if that was sufficient to transform either an individual or a community. And so they emphasize, of course, the ethical nature and the moral nature of the human being as a source of offering and transformation. And then much, much, much later, we have the Hasidic movement that comes along and critiques the emphasis on outer forms of ritual, which in that world was the highest, was considered study. And so they correct that by saying, the real source of transformation comes from within one's heart and from within one's self-exploration of one's being, rather than focusing on those things that are outside of oneself. So thank you so much for kind of getting in that conversation about the inner and the outer. So let me invite David and Susan, please.
Well, for one, I was reminded of one of my favorite poems from childhood, which was Edgar A. Guess takes a heap of living in a house to make it home. And it turns out that he was born 3 years before Bachelard, and Bachelard died 3 years after he did. So they were definitely contemporaries. And I was also reminded there's a Buddhist concept of, like, if you're a potter and you make the perfect pot, you have to destroy it or get rid of it because there's so much ego involved in creating something like that, that's not the purpose of creating.
Yeah, and there are also many cultures in which the notion of perfection is kind of abhorrent, to be avoided, and so there are intentional things that are done to make an object be imperfect, right?
Right.
Right. So, and David, did you want to share?
No, I
Okay.
I have nothing.
Okay, well, that's perfect.
That's not entirely. I have nothing that I want turned into noise.
Well, that's reaching a very high state of being to have nothing.
Yeah.
So, congratulations, Yasha Kalak, dude. Okay.
Don't tell your wife you have nothing, David. You want to take that back after.
Anna, you wanted to share one?
Yes, for the first time, thinking about these dimensions for it, and everything is rectangular. And when we saw that tent-like structure when we were in Israel, it looked so insubstantial against the whole plains and the flow of the sandy desert and the cliffs that, the Egyptians had mined copper from. It was the most magnificent, majestic, huge space. And there was this one little tiny box in the middle of it. Now, Egyptians built pyramids, right? They put things on foundations and they were heavy. And the Bedouins who lived in the desert in tents had these beautiful sloping out structures with the tent poles, and they get pegged to the ground. And they are more of a natural flowing sort of shape. This is a square rectangular box, and I bet just pretty much unlike anything else that was going on right then. And it was not like we think of cathedrals or churches or synagogues as grounded places. It had not a foundation. It sat on the sand.
Well, they slept with.
And it was mobile.
Right, of course, yes. Yes, it was like a vision that changes. It can move around. It's like the rectangular shape of your painting here. It morphs, and one big wind would blow it away.
So it's just really,
It's just like it's juxtaposed in the most unusual sort of way.
and of course that reminds us of the sukkah that we're instructed to build during the holiday of Sukkot, which is supposed to be fragile and vulnerable and exposed to the elements and such. And it's within that we have the capacity to, if we are sufficiently hospitable to other human beings, it's within that structure that we're able to draw within our presence all these spirits,
The ancestors.
the ancestors, yeah, and the ancestors. So to begin to cohere our time together, here's this moment when this is a people which is actually referred to as the Beit Yisrael, the house of Israel, which is actually in the Haftarah portion, Ezekiel, from this week. The verse, say to the house of Israel, Beit Yisrael, I will give you a new heart, Lev Hadash. So that word Lev Hadash, the notion of Hadash in Jewish tradition, especially within the Hasidic tradition, is the notion that what we are each called upon to do is to renew ourselves. And when we're to study, we're to come up with new ideas and new approaches to it. And when we come up with innovative new ways of looking at things, if it's done out of a sense of respect for what has gone before us, It doesn't destroy what's happened before us. It does what Torah is supposed to do, which is expand the world. The world is to be expanded. And it's fascinating to think about how the physicists of the late 19th century, early 20th century recognized through their observations that the universe was not finite, that the universe was expanding and growing. And that's what's in part embedded in this material, which is that's what we are to be embodiments of the universe. We're meant to be constantly expanding and growing. And so that's in this one chapter here, this one portion about what this construction project is all about. It is to design something that expresses and reminds us of our capacity to access other dimensions, including other dimensions within ourselves. And that to emerge out of a different culture, one which was absolutist in its presentation about the way the world existed, and instead presents us with a world which is contingent, a world which is contingent upon what we do, that we have free will and we make a difference in this world, and that who we are at the moment of our birth does not have to be who we are in the moment as we grow up and become what we will ourselves to be. So this is a very dynamic bit of wisdom that we have received through Torah. And in this week's portion, in this story about designing something that will cause these two dimensions that are finite and infinite to come together, is a beautiful work of art, and one that I think is beautifully presented by this painting by Emilia Numavara. Where she has designed for us a space in which everything is there, past, present, and future, and it's a place in which we can grow and dream and imagine something different. And I'm so glad to be part of a community of people who support the notion of imagining the other, imagining the different, and of supporting one another as a kahal, which is of the noun that we get from this verb that's used this week's portion, Vayakhel, which means to assemble, and the word kahal means an assembly. It comes to be known, it's another word for community. So this convocation of a community becomes one that supports a sense of dynamic, a sense of having a wise heart, that's what's most important, and having a generous spirit, and of having and support for imagination that allows us to dream and to build anew. God bless you all. I look forward to our regathering. Oh, so lovely to see you all. Bless you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be well.
Yay for
Bye-bye.
imagination.
Mahalo.